Hello friends, welcome to the Jazz Underground here at the Jazz Ranch. And this is part 2 of my series on easy improvisation. We left off with part 1 with eighth notes. And some of you wanted to know, how do you construct eighth notes based on a set of chord changes. So I'm going to show you that in this video, how to use eighth notes and use approach tones, target tones, passing tones, and so on. And we're eventually going to get into chromatic passing tones and approach tones. So stay with us on this one. I want to start out with a quote first by Dave Brubeck. He said this: "Get out there and improvise, take chances, and don't be a perfectionist." So that's what we're talking about. And also another great quote from, guess who? "Music is the mediator between the spiritual and the sensual life." That was Ludwig van Beethoven said that. So here we go now with improvisation, easy improv, starting with eighth notes. This is part 2 of Easy Improvisation 101. Now in the first part, and you want to watch that, if you haven't watched that, you want to watch that before you watch this particular video because it leads up to this video. And we left off in part 1 with eighth notes. We started out with just half notes, moved it to quarter notes, then passing tones, and then we moved into eighth notes. And I had a subscriber ask me, well, how did you decide which eighth notes to use? Well, I'm going to explain that now. And let's review. Remember, we had the progression 1, 4, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. So that's C major 7, F major 7, E minor 7, A minor 7, D minor 7, G7, C. So that's a very common progression, and it's a good one to apply this exercise to. So the eighth note sounded, original melody was this. Like that. And so when I converted to eighth notes, they sounded like this. Notice that's all on the beat, and it's all C major scale. There's no black notes in this. It's all diatonic scale built on the key of C. So it's just the white notes. Very easy. So if you look at that eighth note line that I played, you can analyze it this way. That's a chord tone, this is a chord tone, this is a chord tone. I'm going to call this a passing tone or approach tone. But it's also a chord tone, but it's acting as an approach tone or passing tone to this note, which becomes the target tone of the next chord. So C major 7 to the F major 7 approaches on the third. So we can call this 3, 5, root, 7th, third. Then this is a chord tone, so that's a target tone and a chord tone. Third, fifth, root. Then I'm going to call this a passing tone. It's also a chord tone. It's repeating the same line as this, but transposed, which is a good idea to try to do. And then the target tone becomes that note, which is the 7th now, a flat 7 of the E minor 7. Target tone, then a 5th, then a 3rd, and then the 7th targeting in there on the A minor on the 3rd. So it's important to know the steps of the scale of each chord you're playing. Of course, 7, 5, 3. So these are target tone and chord tone, chord tone, chord tone, chord tone, and approach tone as well. The target tone there on the 3rd. Then we continue. That becomes the 7th of the D minor 7, which is a chord tone, chord tone, chord tone. In other words, 7, 5, 3, 5, I'm using that as an approach tone to this target tone, which is the 3rd of the G7 target tone. Then this is a passing tone. Remember, the passing tones don't sound so good on the chord, right? You don't want to land on a passing tone. That's moving to the next chord tone like that, and then back to this passing tone or approach tone to that target tone. It could have been this too. Could have used that one to approach just from a step above. So these target tones and passing tones and approach tones are very important to understand, and that they hit at the right point. In other words, it makes sense if they hit on the chord tone when the chord hits. If we hit another note like this, that wouldn't sound right because it's not a target tone. It's not a chord tone of the F chord. See, it's not a good idea. See, this is very simple. We're starting out simple here. We're not doing anything abstract. This is the most simple way of understanding improvisation or even composing in a way. And improvisation is just composing in the spur of the moment. Huh? 3, approaching the 7, approaching the 3, 7, approaching the 3. Now that sounds logical because there's also an ascending line in skips, and then it descends down to that strong target tone, then ascends in the same way in skips, then descends down stepwise to that target tone, then descends in skips back, skipping back up, and then ends on that target tone, then repeats the same line transposed, descending, back up, ascending, then target tone there, and then ascending stepwise, skipping down to that target tone. Very simple, very logical. Next step, I've written out a variation of the 8th note line. Now you can practice these for a long time and make up your own lines and write them out if you need to, but this is what I wrote out for. And 8th notes are really good to practice in a sort of rudimentary way. In other words, just practice them slowly like well, that's the one I wrote out. Now you can see it has target tone or chord tone, target there, approach tone, target tone, approach tone, target. That's the 7th, 5th, 3rd. So you want to have good target tones, and you can practice, and you'll make mistakes, but you. If it's good, it'll sound good, like. And you continue that way and just make up your own lines. Write them out if you need to, but you want to get fluid with 8th notes. And then begin to syncopate them. We're going to show you that same line now, syncopated. Understanding syncopation, how it works in jazz, is one of the more difficult things to grasp. And if you're a classical player, this is a much different way of playing. I mean, all the 8th notes are swing eighths, and you're playing syncopation means that the important notes are falling ahead of the beat or behind the beat. They're not right on the beat, they're on an upbeat. So instead of it being 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, it's like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Like that. So you have this. You see how that works now? You know, to get the jazz feel, it has to be, the notes aren't all equal. It could be like maybe. Has to be phrased a certain way, and it's good exercise to play it with a metronome. I'll show you that. Now, so now we're going to put it on 2 and 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. You can practice this for quite a while and make up your own lines, and it's very beneficial. This next step moves us into intermediate levels. Now, you might want to skip this or just repeat the previous section, or skim this or use it. But either way, we're going to begin to introduce now chromatic passing tones. So we're going to start using black notes in the key of C. So we're going to use some chromatic approaches, which are going to make it sound more like bebop and more like jazz and more like authentic, the way to improvise if you're a jazz improviser. So you had this melody, which is all diatonic. So now adding chromatic approaches, it's going to be more like this. I have to change some of the notes because I want to get that chromatic note in there. Half step above the target tone, and then 2 half steps above the target tone. and then half step above the target tone to a half step below, and then approaching it that way. There's a lot of ways you can do this. You can approach from a half step above, half step below, 2 half steps above, 2 half steps below, combinations of a half step above to a whole step below, or half step below to a whole step above. I mean, there's a variety of different ways to do this, so you can experiment with. Here's the one I wrote out for you. Let's try that again. If you put it to a metronome, that'll help you to get more of a swing feel, particularly on the 2 and 4. This is on 60 now for the 2 and 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so I'm going to continue now and show you the same thing with the 8th note exercise. So now the 8th note exercise, you either have to subtract a note or add one and play them faster. In other words, original exercise was this, to that note. So now I'm adding that chromatic note in there. So I'm taking the E out and making it chromatic, 2 chromatic approaches. And then I'm going down here to that target tone there from 2 chromatic notes below. So I have this. Now this is just an exercise. It's not supposed to sound like a great melody, but it just starts to enable you to get the use of the idea of chromatic approaches. I'm going to make it more musical as I go along here. Now if I put that to a beat or try to make it swing, I'm going to add syncopation after this, but for the first step we'll just get this. 2, 3, 4. Now we're going to syncopate it in the next step. Same idea in syncopating. With 8th notes, you have to remove a note. So rather than it being, I'm going to have to go, I'm going to start her off the beat just for variety. So I'm going to go, take that first note out. And instead of going, I'm going to go directly to that off the beat. So it's going to be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and I put a triplet in there. 1 and 2 and. See, so I'm going to put notes ahead of the beat and add triplets, and then at the end I'm going to add 16th notes, just a couple of them, like that. So it's like this. See how that works? So, put that to a metronome to help us to swing it a little bit. 1, 2, 3, 4. So there you have it. Now that's a good way to practice it with the metronome. And keep the left hand simple till you get the feeling of the swing and you get the idea of how those notes connect to target tones chromatically. It's important that you realize what I'm doing here is I'm creating a drill or an exercise, and it's an intellectual exercise. It isn't all about what you feel. It's all about, using your ears and using your knowledge and the conceptual idea of it, the intellectual idea of it, in order to enable yourself to be able to have a way of improvising that is valid. Now, improvisation is not just mechanical. There has to be feeling. There has to be a feeling of swing. You know, if you practice this as a drill, eventually you want to get to the point. Your goal is to get to the point where you're just feeling this, and your ears are guiding you, and your knowledge of the scales and the chords and everything else that are going on here, and the target tones and the approach tones start to become more automatic. So that just takes over and over and repeating it over and over again till it gets to that point. Eventually it will. You know, if I just play, you know, not think about anything else, it's gonna happen. I'm gonna play wrong notes, so I'm gonna play bad notes, but like, but eventually, you know. Now, I might change some of the chords, so I might alter the 6th chord to dominant. That gives it a little bit more interest, like. See how I begin to now in the A7 there. Instead of A minor, I can go to that C sharp. Now it can introduce that note into the scale, the diatonic C scale. See, I'm doing that chromatic approach. And there's also these turns, like that. Like that. This is all jazz terminology, you know, this is more advanced, but you want to be aware of like what it is and like begin to start to practice this progression step by step, getting better at each step and getting to a point where now it becomes something that is not just a mechanical thing or a drill, but it's felt. And you hear it, and your ears hear the notes, and you know what the approach tones are. You know what the target tones are. You'll make mistakes, but just keep going. Just keep doing it over and over and over again. That's the key to success, is repetitions. I guarantee it. I always say, what is the value of an exercise unless you can apply it to practical usage? In other words, apply it to a song. So the song I'm going to use is Don't Blame Me. It's a great standard. It has a cycle of fifths in it, so it goes C, F minor, B flat, E minor 7, A7, D minor 7, G7, C major 7, D minor 7, G7, E minor, A7, D minor, G7. So it's like a cycle of fifths. And you can, now you want to practice an 8th note exercise based on that chord progression. Just the first 8 bars is enough, like this. Very slowly. I'm using the same kind of configuration in the left hand, just those shells, 1, 7, 1, 3, like that. See, so now I'm doing the same kind of thing in the right hand, where I'm putting in target tones, approach tones, and using chromatic approach tones. So here we have, and I'm using ascending motion, right? Approach tone, target tone, descending, approaching. Now ascending on the A7. I could put a flat 9 in there if I like. Target tone, chromatic approach tone. Now this is just a drill, right? Chromatic approach tone to the 5. Repeating it now up to that flat 9 there on the E minor. Then I put an extra note in there, so there's 16ths. 1 E and E. To that a target tone, flat 9. So now let's make it sound the 8th note a little bit more jazz feel. Okay, so we don't want to just play 8th notes. So let's now figure out the syncopation. You want to practice what I wrote out and also expand upon it. Wrapping up, I just want to say thanks so much for joining me. Please write to me. I hope you got something out of this, learned how to use eighth notes in improvisation, figured out a way to drill and use and practice. Please go to my website for all the free scores. And until next time, I'll say in the words of my great friend Hermie Dressel, swing loose, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.